So before we get started with this week's review, I do have to make an apology to all of you and the team at Star Trek Picard because... Oh my god, look, there was the NX-01 in last week's episode of Star Trek Picard, and it's even the NX-01 refit. Oh my god, they made the refit canon! I'm so excited. Hello interwebs, I am here to review the latest episode of Star Trek Picard, this time Season 3, Episode 7, Dominion. And with a title like that, you know we've got some exciting stuff. But just to reiterate here, I was deeply excited to see people correcting me in the comments last week that the NX-01 did appear in the Fleet Museum. As many of you know, I'm a huge Star Trek Enterprise fan, but even more specifically, the fact that it was the NX-01 refit, which was the Enterprise that they were going to use in Season 5 of that show if they had gotten renewed for that season, made me so excited. Do you want to know how excited I am? This is how excited, because not only do I own one NX-01, not only do I own two of them, including this one being the refit, I own three of them, and two of them being the refit. I'm an Enterprise nerd here, so I was very pleased to see that it was actually there. Though I will say, I'm upset that no one on the Titan is apparently a Scott Bakula fan. Anyways, enough talking about my weird Star Trek Enterprise and Scott Bakula fandom. Let's actually talk about this week's episode of Star Trek Picard, because there is so much to talk about. I'm going to keep the spoiler-free section relatively light, because honestly at this point there's just a ton to talk about with this episode, but I will say this for spoiler-free. This was a lot of fun. Not only was there some amazing surprises in this episode, like, again, if you loved the stuff with Ro Laren a few episodes ago, you'll be very pumped for this one on that level. But also, I like that this episode finally gave us some answers to questions that we've had surrounding different mysteries going on this season, while also giving us tantalizing little hints of future ones as well that we've also been sort of building up here. But specifically, I think this was the big showcase for Vadic. Amanda Plummer has been amazing this whole season, but I've been very open about my fact that I've been kind of disappointed about the fact that she's sort of been sequestered away on her own ship, and we haven't gotten a chance to actually see her interact with a lot of our own crew face to face. That is very much fixed this episode, and not in the way that I actually expected after the end of last week's episode, so that was excellent to see. On top of that too, there are some really interesting ethical conundrums in the best Star Trek way possible that are brought up here that I really thought were fascinating, not only in terms of delving into the history of the Star Trek franchise, but also ethical conundrums that are brought up by our characters themselves in ways that they wrestle with. And yes, it's not a 45-minute long episode that focuses in on one specific ethical thought, which you would get back in The Next Generation, but the fact that they are tangling with so many different ones at the same time, and there's so many complicating factors, it just speaks to the complexity of the show that I was able to track them all, and while not always agreeing with the characters, was able to understand where they were coming from, and even the villains as well. So for all of that, I thought this was an excellently interwoven episode that sort of pays off a lot of stuff we've been seeing throughout the season, sets some stuff up for the future, and just proves that this season is a marked step up for Star Trek Picard as a whole. Also, for some reason, my picture of Vadic that I had in the background here just turned off, so let me get that back up, because Vadic, I guess she's coming for me. Alright, so much to talk about this week. Let's get into it. So, first off, holy crap, we get Tuvok guest starring on this episode. It was so amazing. I literally jumped out of my chair and screamed when I saw Tim Russ on that view screen talking to Seven. And it makes so much sense that Seven would go to Tuvok. He's a captain now, it looks like, by the way, which makes sense for him. And that she would be someone that she trusts because he was probably one of the closer characters that she was with in Voyager. I think Janeway probably being the only other one. Maybe Chakotay if you wanted to go down that rabbit hole with us, which I don't want to at the moment. But definitely Tuvok was up there, and I love that this interplay where she is trying to figure out whether or not she can trust him. It was kind of a reiteration of what we saw with Ro a few weeks ago, but this time with Tuvok and Seven, and building upon their relationship and her sort of like talking about like Cal-To and things like that. All of that was wonderful, and I like that they were using the voice recorder to try and test this, because they don't really have any other way to tell if someone's a changeling or not. And I think even with a Vulcan, because Tuvok has such a specific speech pattern, that it might be easy to detect him that way. But ultimately that's not the case, and Seven is actually able to get one up on him and figure that he is a changeling, because she has had surgery on herself for her Borg implants that we saw way back in Voyager. So I love that she was able to catch him on that. That was absolutely fantastic, as well as the little Vulcan sort of anti-Kolinar protest there. And what I loved most, though, was Tim Russ giving that little smirk, just a little Tim Russ smirk that you just know he's wanted to do for forever, playing Tuvok on Voyager, and just having him have that little subtle sign of emotion was so creepy and so menacing, because you're just not used to that on Tim Russ's Tuvok's face, and it was just, oh, it was so chilling. And then for him to turn into Riker to fuck with Picard was also chilling. I love the setting of stakes here, and this nice little cameo moment in a way that was chilling. It was so cool. Also during this scene, we get a name drop of Admiral Janeway again, so that makes 3 by my count. They are just name dropping Admiral Janeway everywhere, which means they better be giving me a Kate Mulgrew cameo at the end of the season. I will be deeply upset if that is not the case. You don't give me a Chekhov's Janeway in the first act and the second act, and again in whatever act we're in right now, and not pay it off with a Chekhov's Kate Mulgrew going off in the final act. This metaphor fell apart. Let's move on. We then have a little briefing scene where we start to debate whether or not they should create a virus to try to kill the changelings. And I liked that this was a sort of ethical dilemma brought forward by Beverly, because Beverly is the character, if you remember from TNG, who always did sort of bring forward these moral dilemmas. I think way back to one of her first big episodes was one on the Prime Directive.
You don't think drug addiction and exploitation is sufficient cause to do something?
This situation has existed for a very long time. These two societies are intertwined in a symbiotic relationship.
With one society profiting at the expense of the other.
She also had the episode literally titled, I think, Ethics, where she was talking about morals and surgery. And so this has always been something that she has been open about. And also this moral dilemma reminds me of I, Borg with Hugh back in TNG, where Picard sort of wrestled with his own hatred and anger at the Borg, and then believing that they needed to genocide the Borg and ultimately walking back from that because of, you know, seeing and personifying Hugh as a Borg. So I like that we're sort of getting the opposite end of this, as we'll see later with Vadic, but also that Beverly sort of wrestling with this moral dilemma that's come up here. The only weird thing I will say is that we had at the end of last episode Riker getting kidnapped by Vadic, and we don't get to see him this whole episode, and there's kind of a one-off line that like Worf and Raffi checked Daysum Station, but they couldn't find Riker, so they're coming back. Feels a little bit weird that they would set up that whole storyline with the two of them to like go off and rescue Riker, and then that not ultimately being a thing that happens. Just a little bit of a strange sort of yada yadaing why they weren't in the episode. Not a big deal, but it was just felt like they were setting someone up that they ultimately didn't explore. We also get them talking about the idea that potentially they might be using Picard and Jack's body to create a doppelganger of Picard for the Frontier Day celebrations. I don't know if I buy that. I feel like they are good enough as changeling to be able to get by without creating a perfect duplicate of them, so I wonder if this is just supposition on our character's part, not actually what they plan to do, because I think there's something more going on here, as we see with Jack in just a little bit. But then we go and visit the student-type android that they rescued last week, and Brent Spiner just is having so much fun playing both Data and Laura. Like, I love his performance as both of them. He is perfectly capturing both of those characters again, and I love... I know it's ageism, but it comes from a villain, so I think it's fine to laugh at it a little bit. But so Laura, like, just joking about Picard's old face kind of had me chuckle a little bit. I was dying at that. And I love that we get explanations of Laura's archness. Just like, sometimes a little bit of dramatic flair is needed when facing people like this, and I'm like, yes, hell yeah. For me, the best, and people may defer, but for me, the best Star Trek villains are the ones who are over the top, whether it be, you know, the one character from Strange New Worlds who we saw last season, who I won't name because it's a little bit of a spoiler, but also, you know, characters like Q, or arguably even Khan. They're always people that have a little bit of, like, heightened theatricality to them. So I always adore, like, an over-the-top sort of villain, and Lord fits that to the T, and Brent Spiner is playing him so much. And I like that we sort of get Geordi explaining that, well, most of the other personalities are integrated, Data and Lore are separated, and so they kind of would have to fight each other if one was to gain dominance. And I like Geordi sort of being like, I couldn't see Data get lost again. It would destroy me. And I hear all the Data and Geordi shippers at that moment going like, oh my god, he loves him, he misses him so much. I thought that was adorable. adorable and like perfectly nailed the Data Geordi dynamic that we missed so much. That was ultimately done a huge disservice in the Star Trek feature films. You know, we got a little bit of Data and Geordi in Star Trek Generations, but then after that, they kind of got put to the wayside, which is so sad considering that the friendship was so core to them in TNG. And as much as I like the Picard Data interactions that we got throughout the TNG movies, it was really sad that we didn't get to see Geordi get to continue that friendship as much. So finally getting that payoff here, and getting a moment where Geordi gets to feel the weight of Data's death from Star Trek Nemesis. We even get a little call out to the scimitar there in this moment from Brent Spiner himself. I thought was a much needed context that we didn't get in Nemesis for various different reasons. Not the least of which was the bad editing of the removal of the character scenes in that movie. Seriously, Nemesis is not a great movie, but look at the deleted scenes, and there's so many great scenes that were just left on the cutting room table of Nemesis. It was a wild decision. We then get Vadic again speaking to the weird floating head changeling thing, and I really need to know what that is. Is it like a personification of the Great Link, or what is that? I want to know what this weird head thing is. But it starts to pressure her and say, you need to get this thing done, and I like this because it brings us to where Vadic's going to go in the next scene that we see her in, where she does encounter the sort of disabled Titan, and she says, oh, we need to go on to it, we need to get it, there's TikTok times moving on. It just showcases that she's making mistakes because of the pressure that she feels. She's not some like perfect villain with a master plan. She's like honestly just trying to like get along and get things done. And I thought that was a great way to sort of add this pressure to her and make her feel, for lack of a better word, more human. Again, probably a bad word for the character. I'm sure she'd take issue with it. But you know what I mean. Like personify her more and show her foibles. It made her three-dimensional, and I really liked that. But before we get Vadic coming on the Titan, we do get a quick little scenes with Jack and LaForge, and I love them starting to hit on each other. I love this little like romance that we got going on. I would have liked a few more scenes of them sort of like joking with each other, but I'm enjoying the romance so far. But then we start to get more hints of what's going on with Jack, because he can start to read her mind. And that is really interesting to me. And I have a theory that I'll save for the end of the episode. So I have a thought on what's going on with Jack that I will save because it's alluded to a little bit later on. But I did find it really funny that when like she asked him a question, Jack's eyes just start glowing, and I'm just like, oh boy. I remember the times when I'm on a date with a boy and his eyes just start glowing. It gets weird too. It's a weird thing that boys do. But then we get a quick scene with Picard and Jack as they discover that Vadic may be able to find them, is trying to like send a signal to them. And I really like that Jack is kind of self-hating. He feels self-hating because of something that he's born with and shouldn't feel ashamed of or upset about. As we ultimately see, it's used for good later on in the episode, but he does have fear and shame in it. And as someone who's part of the LGBTQ community who is told to feel shame at being LGBTQ when I shouldn't be at all, and I'm just born the way I am, I resonated very heavily with that, with him being self-hating and feeling like he doesn't deserve to be protected. I thought it fits his character and adds a nice dimension to him. But then Picard sort of calling that out and saying, you don't deserve any of this, we can stand up and actually we have a plan, which then leads to them using the Titan as bait, which I thought was really clever. And again, it probably was an obvious trap, but you do see that Vadic is falling for it because she's out of time, and she says, well, we just got to do what we got to do. It's the only chance that we have, even though it is sort of an obvious trap. So I like that it makes sense for her character that she would make this mistake. And ultimately, it kind of works out for her anyways. And then we get a fun little action sequence where Vadic comes on and she says, oh, I want to capture you, Jack, because I want to bring you someplace nice. It'll be fun. There'll be ponies. We'll have dogs. It'll be great. It'll be like a big farm upstate. But Jack doesn't have any of that. So they manage to capture all of the changelings, including the mini-boss dude. I like that there was like the bigger changeling guy who was basically the mini-boss. I thought that was cool to see him, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But then we finally have Beverly and Picard facing off against Vadic, which I desperately needed Vadic to be able to bounce off some of our main characters. I like that Beverly gets first crack at it, basically playing bad cop to Picard's good cop, and I love Vadic saying I'm bored already, but Beverly getting a moment to like be with Vadic on her own before Picard comes in, and getting Beverly to be a full character instead of an acquiescence to Picard and sort of like stating like, you came after my son, screw you. I thought that was a good moment for Beverly, instead of the show just being like, yeah, but we'll focus on Picard folding completely. But then one of my favorite moments of the episode came here, which was Vadic explaining her backstory, and oh boy, did I really find this fascinating because, you know, I love the way Amanda Plummer performance, talking about symphony and noise, and I love the sound effect design, by the way. Whoever did the sound design on Star Trek Picard is great because she talks about screaming when she was being tortured by this scientist, and the screaming sound was the sound of boiling water, which would make sense for Changeling, and it's a really creepy and visceral and such a clever choice to display screaming of a Changeling. Like, the sound design was top-notch here. But basically, I love this back and forth that Vadic has with Picard and Beverly about Dominion war crimes. Because she says, well, the Federation was barely, 2 years into war and they already chose genocide. And she is absolutely correct in that. If you go back and watch Deep Space Nine, it was Section 31, but it was the Federation who chose to try to genocide the Dominion with the morphogenic virus that basically came very close to actually wiping them out. And it was a choice that the Federation made against their morals. Again, you could toss it to Section 31. I think it's more interesting to view Section 31 as a part of the Federation, whether or not people in the Federation would agree or not. Steve Shives actually just did a really good video on this. But they chose to murder them, and she is rightfully upset about that. But Picard and Beverly say, oh, well, we created a cure and we gave it to you. And she's actually like, no. One of our own stole it for us. Which I find curious because it might be like a misreading of her own history, how she biases it herself, because, the actual story was Bashir was the one who stole the cure from Section 31 at Deep Space Nine.
Radenine, lidostolinine, aspirinine, adenine. That's it.
I think it's time we got out of here.
Hold on a minute.
What for?
These files, they contain all of Sloane's memories on Section 31. With this information, we could destroy the entire organization.
That'll have to wait.
With help from O'Brien and Odo as well, who Odo being the Changeling from Deep Space Nine that she's probably referring to here. But it was actually Bashir who stole the virus cure for her people. But I'm sure her people probably have their own warped view of history. And we even get a little hint of that here because, yes, while the Federation did have war crimes and should be called out for them here, and I like that this is sort of coming back of that, but if we remember, the Dominion also committed war crimes themselves, putting Cardassian civilians in the way of Federation ships during the war to protect their military bases, as well as attempting to genocide numerous people with their own viruses in their own Dominion worlds, and then also planning to wipe out all of humanity if they won the Dominion War.
If the Cardassian people are responsible for these acts of terrorism, if Damar and his fanatics have turned them against us, then it's the people who should be punished.
Now, what do you say to that?
Severely punished.
Oh, well, I'm glad we all agree. See to it.
So by no means the Dominion have their hands clean either. Two wrongs don't make a right here, but I like that both sides of this fight have a bias towards their own history that Vadic is displaying, and also Beverly and Crusher are. It's just well-written scenes that if you know the full history, if you watch Deep Space Nine, you know how they're both kind of subtly wrong here. But I like that Vadic herself is upset because she was the one that they tested getting the cure on and actually made the virus with in the first place, because Section 31 obviously would have had a test on Changelings to be able to do that. And so they had been doing it on her, and that's why she's so filled with hate and anger. Rightfully so, to a degree, because of the horrific tortures that she had been done to her. And the fact that she took on her torturer's face was heartbreaking. And it all leads to her sort of revealing, like, it was the Federation themselves, Section 31 potentially, that created her and her people, that they made them, like, better changelings than before. I love this because it showcases that the Federation has a hand in this. And I liked at the end here, and this is probably going to be the most controversial choice of the episode, is after hearing all of this, Beverly and Picard understand that they are morally compromised at this moment. So I like the acknowledgement that Beverly and Picard are like, we're not functioning at, like, peak morality here, but they choose to kill Vadic, which personally is a choice that I don't even want to say I disagree with, because I understand it. There is a point, and this is something that I understand in my own advocacy elsewhere, is like, you can understand someone's pain and trauma and understand where it comes from and understand that it comes from a very real and understandable place, but also understand that these are people also calling for their own genocide. And at some point you need to punch them in the face. You need to stop them by any means necessary. And it is not a nice thing to do. It is not a good thing to do. But in the face of trying to protect from a genocide occurring, sometimes you need to do these things. You need to kill somebody in order to get that done. And, ideally, you'd be able to hold her accountable, put her on trial, and all of that stuff. But this isn't the situation that they're in. They don't have that ability at the moment. And so they make the choice that they make. And I can very much understand if people out there are on the other side are much more against Beverly and Picard's choice here. I am certainly conflicted about it myself. I'm not 100% on their side here, but I understand where it comes from, very much so. And I like that the show, I don't think, is necessarily agreeing with them 100%, but having the debate. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on in the episode, with Beverly wrestling with the morality of creating a virus again in the first place. So it's sort of like wrestling with all of those choices. But then this brings us over to Data and Geordi and Lore, and when we learn that Lore is the one that's fucking with the ship and might possibly let the changeling prisoners out, I love Geordi's speech to Lore being like, or to Data really, you made me a better man. I was lost without you until I had your memory. And again, Geordi and Data shippers having a moment here, I am sure. It was just such a beautiful speech, and again, spoke to their friendship that we didn't get to really have a full resolution of, that I thought was so wonderful and amazing, and Lore being creepy as hell, and letting the changelings loose. And so I thought all of that stuff with Data and Lore was so emotional and evocative and just wonderful. There's so much to talk about here in this episode. God dang, I feel like I'm going to go on forever. But then this brings us over to Jack and LaForge having to fight the changelings, and Jack sort of networking with LaForge's mind to help her fight the mini-boss. And this is where I really liked the mini-boss character. It's just a subtle thing for me. But I would have been kind of upset if, like, Jack and LaForge had both fought individual changelings of the same strength, and LaForge had lost and Jack had won his fight. Or at least LaForge seemed to be losing until Jack helps her, because it would have been like, oh, the woman loses the fight and the guy would have won the fight. But by making, the person that LaForge fights the mini-boss, like the bigger changeling, it at least allows this sort of thing, like, LaForge can handle herself, but she's also facing a bigger threat than Jack is. And Jack's also more trained, and he's able to help her with his ability by linking into her mind. So this is gonna be a theory, so skip ahead 1 minute if you don't want to hear my theory on this, but I have to put it here, because this fight with Jack and interlocking minds with LaForge is intercut with Vadic giving a speech about empathy and how people, the Federation is able to not care for other species because they sometimes lack empathy for people who are not like them, showcasing her prejudice against solids, but also like talking about the Great Link and how the changelings have kind of a hive mind structure. They're able to link with each other and able to kind of connect with each other empathetically. And I thought that was a subtle nod, not just to the like sometimes lack of humanizing other species that aren't us, that the Federation and humanity as a whole even today falls into. I thought that was a good calling out of that issue. But also connecting to her ethos as a changeling, but also to me, subtly might be calling to, again, the theory that I put up last week, that whatever's going on with Jack, he is part Borg. I'm doubling down on this theory that he has the ability to, like, Borg astral project or whatever, and has some Borg technology because his father was Picard. And we got a hint of that with Data earlier in the episode, where Data says, well, the previous diagnosis of Irumodic syndrome it might be in doubt because there's something else going on with Picard. And if you think about it, the time that Picard got diagnosed with Irumodic syndrome, both in All Good Things and in Picard Season 1, was after he had been assimilated by the Borg to become Locutus. So what if the Irumodic syndrome that he actually had wasn't Irumodic syndrome, but actually whatever the Borg stuff that was still in him in his body that the changeling needed to steal is influencing, and that was passed on to Jack in whatever little Borg sperm that he's passing on to Beverly. Don't know how that works, but it's an interesting thought. So whatever's going on with Jack, my guess is it's because he is part Borg in some way, and that's why he's able to connect, and that sort of like is hinted at in Vadic's speech about being able to connect with others, because she clearly knows what's going down. But then this all leads to the end of the episode where Vadic and everyone gets free, and they manage to capture Shaw. And I have to say, I was so scared that they killed Shaw, because I could see them killing Shaw. He's not one of our main legacy cast. I could see them killing him, and I was like, if you kill Shaw, I will riot. I will take that. I will quit watching the show. You do not hurt my Shaw. I love him so much, so I was very glad that he was okay. But then Vadic is able to take control of the ship and take over the bridge, and she is now in control of the Titan. So really great cliffhanger to end the episode on there. I love Vadic getting into being in control and just speaking to the ship. It was wonderful. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this episode. Like I said, so much to talk about. This was filled with stuff, whether it be interesting ethical arguments, great developments in terms of some of the mysteries we've got going on here, Vadic killing it, building out some of the history of Deep Space Nine to inform the traumas of our current characters, as well as increasing some of the great mysteries that have been going on, and then also giving Geordi and Data shippers the best moments they've had in decades. I am so happy for that. So yeah, this was an utterly fantastic episode. And I forgot Tuvok. Like, amongst everything, we had Tuvok here too. Hot damn, what a freaking episode. This season of Star Trek Picard is fantastic, but I want to hear all of your thoughts down below. What did you think of this episode? And beyond all that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.